Welcome to the Legalpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Sager, founder and CEO of Legalpreneur Inc. As a serial entrepreneur and someone that works exclusively with small business owners legally protecting their business, I'm dedicated to covering common legal issues faced by business owners, providing you with the business knowledge you need to catapult your business's growth and showing you just how some of the world's most elite entrepreneurs have handled these legal and business issues themselves. In true attorney fashion, the information in this episode is not legal advice. This is for informational purposes only, and you should always consult with your attorney before implementing any of the information in the show. Hello there. Welcome back to another episode of the Legalpreneur Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about accountants, taxes, and whether you should do them yourself or should you hire somebody. Now, I'm always going to say it depends. It's going to depend on several things, but number one being where exactly you are in business. So for me personally, I did my own taxes up until 2020. And I mean, even business taxes, I did them on my own up until 2020. So that was like even 5 years of business taxes on my own. However, I did major in accounting in undergrad, and I wanted to be a tax attorney. So I've had like a lot of education around this stuff. I never practiced as an accountant or anything like that, but I did have, I knew enough to be dangerous and to actually do it on my own. If you are an individual without a business, I typically always think you can do it on your own unless you have like a lot of investments, a lot of things that just make it simple. But if you have a business, which if you're listening to this podcast, you most likely have a business, then you probably want to start thinking about hiring somebody. And even when it comes to bookkeeping, you might be able to do your books on your own. However, you might want to start thinking about outsourcing. So I've always used QuickBooks for bookkeeping. And even now, whoever I'm using for bookkeeping, they use my QuickBooks. But as far as accounting goes and doing your taxes, I think you need to have somebody else do them for you. I think you should have an accountant / a CPA. Because there's things that you probably don't know about that you can be taking advantage of when it comes to taxes. But on that same line, there are things that might be risky. It's all about risk. I always talk about risk levels, and you want to make sure you have an accountant that's not too risky, because there are some things in the tax code that if you're using this exemption or this exception to take this deduction or that, it could actually flag you to be audited, and then maybe you actually shouldn't have taken that, and so you get penalized, and it could be a huge headache. So you always want to make sure you have a reputable accountant / CPA that aligns with your risk. So there are accountants who will say, hey, I'm very, very safe. I do things by the book. I don't try to bend any rules. I don't try to stretch any rules. And if that's who you are as a person, that's probably the type of accountant that you need. Now, if you're somebody that's like, hey, I can handle a little bit of risk, find an accountant that can handle a little bit of risk. If you are like, I am living life on the edge and I want to pay Uncle Sam absolutely nothing, then you need to find an accountant that aligns with that. There's somebody out there for everybody. So when you're looking for an accountant, figure out where you fall when it comes to risk and find an accountant that aligns with that risk. Now, what's the difference between an accountant and a CPA and a bookkeeper? 3 different things. Now, a bookkeeper, they just keep your books. They keep up with your debits, credits, make sure all the books are up to date. Now, an accountant and a CPA can be different. However, a CPA, certified public accountant, can be an accountant and they can be a bookkeeper. But a bookkeeper may not be an accountant, nor may they be a CPA. Like it can be one way, but it may not be the other. And you can also just have a tax preparer, which means they don't really do accounting. They just prepare your taxes. You probably have to come to them with your books already done. So there's a whole slew and different mix of people you can find in the accounting industry. True accountants might only work for bigger companies because they have to have different reports, different financials done. So you may not necessarily just need an accountant. You may just need a bookkeeper and a tax preparer. However, if your business or your entire portfolio as an individual has investments and it has risky things here, things there, then you may need to have more than just a bookkeeper and a tax preparer. Now, if you are a company that has investors, then you need to make sure that you work with a CPA, a certified public accountant. There are a number of tax people, accountants out there that may lead you to believe they're a CPA, but they're not. So you always want to make sure that you are looking and making sure that the person you're working with has the proper designation. Like if you're a small business, you don't necessarily need a CPA. I think it's always best to work with a CPA if possible, but they will most likely cost more than a normal accountant or tax preparer. And a CPA, they've had the required education, which is a certain number of college hours, accounting hours, and they've worked as an accountant for a certain number of years. And they've passed the exam, which I think there's like certain parts of the exam. So there's like 4 different parts of the exam. So they've passed all of them. A CPA is like as high as it gets when it comes specifically to accounting. So if you are a corporation, you have investors, or you have people that say, hey, your books need to be audited by a CPA, then you need to make sure that you are actually working with a CPA. Big difference if they're not, because that can just cost you a lot of money and waste you a lot of time. So if you're a small business listening to this, and I mean small business, like less than $100,000, it might just be your side hustle and you're trying to figure out what to do, then you probably just need a bookkeeper. Or if you're still in that DIY stage doing everything yourself, just take a quick course on keeping your own books and learn how to get really good at QuickBooks. And make sure you're keeping up with those books, or hire a bookkeeper, and then pay for a tax preparer come tax time. One thing you also may want to do is pay for tax strategy. Tax strategy can also help you save a lot of money in business and obviously taxes. But once you're a business owner, there are a lot of things that you can take advantage of when it comes to taxes that you couldn't take advantage of when you were only an individual and only got a W-2. So if you have a business, I do think you should at some point work with an accountant, whether or not they're a CPA, a tax preparer, and somebody that can give you good tax strategy. Make sure they're trusted. Make sure they align with your risk levels. That's my little spiel on accountants, CPAs, bookkeepers, and whether you should hire one out or not, whether you should outsource it. Personally, I think you should always outsource it from the beginning because it can become a huge headache. You can get audited. It can cost you penalties. But if you are somebody that has a background in accounting or taxes, then you may be able to handle it on your own for a while. I stopped doing mine once I made that S-Corp election, because at that point you do have to actually file a business tax return. And at that point I was like, I ain't doing this, because it's a difference between doing a Schedule C on your taxes versus doing just the 1120, which is the business tax return. So that's my spiel. Thanks for coming today. Thanks for listening. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Here at Legalpreneur, we're committed to providing a supportive legal community for all business owners. I know how scary the legal stuff can be. If you found this information helpful, I would be so grateful if you could share it with a fellow business owner. And quite frankly, it doesn't cost anything to rate, review, or subscribe to the show. Your support helps me reach more listeners, which allows me to support more business owners in their entrepreneurial journey. Have any questions or comments about the show? feel free to drop me a line on Instagram. I promise I read all of the messages and comments. And if you want to be a guest on the show or know someone that would make a great guest, simply fill out our application form and a team member will reach out if we think it's a good fit. I'll see you in the next episode.